Captain Sarah Martinez felt the familiar rumble of her A-10 Thunderbolt II beneath her as she soared through the early morning sky over Afghanistan. The sun was just beginning to peek over the rugged mountain ranges, casting long shadows across the desert below. She had been flying combat missions for 3 years, but today felt different somehow. There was an electricity in the air that made her grip the controls a little tighter. Her radio crackled to life with the voice of her wingman, Captain Jake Thompson, flying in formation beside her. They had been assigned to provide close air support for ground operations in the volatile Helmand province, where intelligence reports suggested heavy Taliban activity. Sarah checked her instruments one more time, ensuring all systems were green. Her A-10 was loaded with a full complement of 30mm cannon rounds and precision-guided missiles. The mission briefing that morning had been routine. Patrol the designated grid squares, maintain radio contact with ground forces, and be ready to provide immediate support if requested. What the briefing hadn't prepared her for was the urgency in the voice that would soon come through her headset, changing everything. Miles below, Navy SEAL Team Alpha was moving through a narrow valley, their boots silent against the rocky terrain. Master Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez led the 6-man team, each member carrying specialized equipment for their reconnaissance mission. They had been tracking a high-value target for weeks, and intelligence finally placed him in a compound just ahead. The SEALs had been in country for 2 months, conducting night raids and gathering intelligence on terrorist networks. Rodriguez was a 15-year veteran who had seen combat in multiple theaters, but he never took any mission lightly. His team trusted him implicitly, and he felt the weight of that responsibility with every step they took. As they approached the target compound, something felt wrong. The usual signs of civilian activity were absent. No children playing, no women hanging laundry, no men tending to livestock. The silence was deafening, and Rodriguez raised his hand, signaling his team to halt. Through his binoculars, he could see movement in the buildings ahead, but it wasn't the casual movement of everyday life. Suddenly, the morning silence shattered like glass. Muzzle flashes erupted from multiple positions around the compound, and the distinctive crack of AK-47 rounds split the air. The SEALs dove for cover behind a rocky outcropping as bullets whined overhead and struck the ground around them, sending up small clouds of dust and debris. Rodriguez immediately realized they had walked into a trap. The intelligence had been compromised, or worse, deliberately leaked to draw them into an ambush. He counted at least 8 firing positions, far more resistance than they had been briefed to expect. His team was pinned down with limited cover, and the enemy seemed to know exactly where they were. Petty Officer First Class David Kim, the team's communications specialist, was already working his radio, calling for immediate extraction. But the nearest helicopter was 40 minutes away, and the enemy fire was intensifying. Rodriguez knew they needed help, and they needed it fast. The Taliban fighters had chosen their ambush site well. The SEAL team was in a natural kill zone with little room to maneuver. High ground surrounded them on 3 sides, and enemy fighters were using the elevated positions to rain down accurate fire. Rodriguez could hear the enemy shouting to each other, coordinating their attack. Through the chaos of gunfire, Rodriguez spotted something that made his blood run cold. More fighters were moving to flank their position from the east, carrying what appeared to be rocket-propelled grenades. If those fighters reached their planned position, the SEAL team would be completely surrounded with no escape route. Kim's voice cut through the noise as he established contact with the air support orbiting overhead. Captain Martinez and her wingmen had been monitoring the ground frequencies, waiting for just such a call. When Kim's desperate voice came through requesting immediate close air support, Sarah felt her training kick in automatically. The coordinates came through clear and precise. Rodriguez, despite the intense enemy fire, managed to relay their exact position and the locations of enemy fighters with calm professionalism. Sarah input the data into her targeting system while simultaneously beginning her descent toward the target area. Below, the SEALs continued to fight desperately. Sergeant First Class Michael Torres, the team's medic, was treating a minor wound on one of his teammates while returning fire with his rifle. The sound of incoming rounds was constant now, some striking so close that rock fragments peppered their position. Rodriguez knew they were running out of time and ammunition. The flanking force was getting closer, and he could see the sun glinting off the metal of their weapons. He made the decision that would change everything. Keying his radio, he spoke the words that every ground soldier hopes never to have to say in combat. The request for immediate close air support went out over the radio waves, carrying with it the hopes and lives of 6 American warriors trapped in an impossible situation. High above, Captain Sarah Martinez heard those words and felt the full weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. 6 lives depended on her skill, her aircraft, and her ability to deliver precise, devastating firepower exactly where it was needed. As she banked her A-10 into position for the attack run, Sarah could see the muzzle flashes below and the small figures of the SEAL team taking cover. The enemy positions were clearly marked by their constant firing, and she began to line up her first target. The familiar weight of the aircraft felt reassuring as she prepared to bring the full fury of American air power to bear on the enemies below. Captain Sarah Martinez pushed her A-10 into a steep dive, the powerful engines responding instantly to her commands. The aircraft that pilots affectionately called the Warthog was built around its massive 30mm A-10 cannon, and Sarah was about to demonstrate why enemy forces feared the sound of its approach. Through her heads-up display, she could clearly identify the enemy positions that Master Chief Rodriguez had marked. The Taliban fighters had made a tactical error by concentrating their fire from fixed positions, making them perfect targets for precision airstrikes. Sarah's training kicked in as she calculated wind speed, target distance, and approach angle in seconds. The first target was a machine gun nest positioned on a rocky ledge about 200 meters from the pinned SEAL team. Sarah could see the muzzle flashes as the enemy gunner continued to pour fire down on the Americans below. She lined up her targeting reticle and squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 cannon erupted with a sound like thunder mixed with tearing fabric. The 7-barrel rotary cannon fired depleted uranium rounds at a rate of 3,900 rounds per minute, and the effect was immediate and devastating. The rocky ledge, where the machine gun had been positioned, simply disappeared in a cloud of dust and debris. Rodriguez watched in amazement as the first enemy position was eliminated with surgical precision. The constant chatter of the machine gun that had been keeping his team pinned down suddenly went silent, replaced by the distinctive sound of the A-10's cannon that every American ground soldier learned to love. But Sarah wasn't finished. She pulled her aircraft up and around in a tight turn, already identifying her next target. The Taliban fighters in the remaining positions seemed stunned by the sudden destruction of their comrades, but they quickly resumed firing, perhaps not understanding what they were facing. The second target was a group of fighters positioned behind a low stone wall. They had been using the cover to move closer to the SEAL team's position, and their elimination was critical to preventing the team from being overrun. Sarah adjusted her approach angle and lined up for another gun run. This time, the enemy fighters saw her coming. Some began to scatter, while others foolishly tried to engage the heavily armored aircraft with small arms fire. Their bullets bounced harmlessly off the A-10's titanium armor plating as Sarah brought her cannon to bear once again. The stone wall that had provided cover for the Taliban fighters proved useless against the power of the GAU-8. The depleted uranium rounds tore through the stone like it was made of paper, and the fighters behind it simply vanished in the storm of destruction that followed. Captain Thompson, Sarah's wingman, had been circling above, providing overwatch and coordinating with ground forces. Now he called out additional targets that were trying to escape the area. 2 pickup trucks loaded with armed fighters were attempting to flee the scene, racing across the desert terrain toward a distant ridgeline. Sarah acknowledged the target information and began pursuit of the fleeing vehicles. The A-10 might not be the fastest aircraft in the Air Force inventory, but it was more than capable of catching up to vehicles on the ground. She descended to attack altitude and locked onto the first truck with her targeting system. The first vehicle exploded in a ball of fire as Sarah's cannon rounds found their mark. The truck flipped end over end before coming to rest as a burning wreck. The second vehicle, seeing the fate of the first, began taking evasive action, weaving back and forth across the desert floor. But there was no escaping the Warthog. Sarah adjusted her aim and fired another burst from her cannon. The second truck suffered the same fate as the first, its cargo of weapons and fighters eliminated in seconds. The desert fell silent, except for the sound of burning vehicles and the drone of aircraft engines overhead. Down in the rocks, Master Chief Rodriguez couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. In less than 3 minutes, Captain Martinez had eliminated every enemy position that had been threatening his team. The constant sound of gunfire that had filled the air for the past 20 minutes was replaced by an eerie quiet. Rodriguez keyed his radio to report the situation to both the aircraft overhead and his command center. All enemy positions had been neutralized with no friendly casualties. The SEAL team was safe and could now complete their extraction without further interference. But Sarah's work wasn't finished yet. She began a series of reconnaissance passes over the area, using her aircraft's sensors to search for any remaining threats. The A-10 was equipped with advanced targeting systems that could detect heat signatures and movement, making it an excellent platform for battle damage assessment. During her reconnaissance, Sarah spotted something that concerned her. Additional heat signatures were moving toward the area from the north, possibly reinforcements responding to the sound of battle. She immediately reported this information to the ground team and requested permission to investigate further. The approaching signatures turned out to be another group of Taliban fighters, approximately 12 men carrying heavy weapons, including mortars and additional RPGs. They were moving rapidly toward the SEAL team's position, clearly intending to continue the fight. Rodriguez realized that his team needed to move immediately. The original extraction point was compromised, and they needed to reach an alternate location before the new enemy force arrived. But carrying their wounded teammate and their mission equipment, the team couldn't move fast enough to avoid another confrontation. That's when Sarah made a decision that would be talked about in military circles for years to come. Instead of waiting for the enemy to reach the SEAL team's position, she decided to take the fight to them. She identified the approaching fighter's location and began planning an attack that would eliminate the threat before it could endanger the Americans on the ground. The new enemy force was moving in a loose formation across open desert, making them vulnerable to air attack, but also more challenging to engage simultaneously. Sarah would need to make multiple attack runs to eliminate all the targets, and she would have to do it quickly before they could scatter and take cover. As she lined up for her first attack run on the approaching enemy force, Sarah felt the familiar calm that came over her during combat operations. Her training had prepared her for exactly this type of mission, and she was determined to ensure that the brave men on the ground made it home safely. The Taliban fighters below had no idea what was about to hit them. Captain Sarah Martinez banked her A-10 hard to the left, lining up on the approaching enemy reinforcements. Through her targeting system, she could see the 12 Taliban fighters spread across the desert floor, moving rapidly toward the SEAL team's position. They carried heavy weapons and moved with the confidence of experienced fighters who believed they had the advantage. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Sarah's first target was the lead element of 3 fighters, who were carrying what appeared to be a portable mortar system. If that weapon reached an effective range, it could rain explosive shells down on the SEAL team's position with devastating accuracy. She couldn't allow that to happen. The A-10 screamed down from the sky like an avenging angel, and Sarah squeezed the trigger on her cannon. The familiar roar filled the cockpit as hundreds of depleted uranium rounds poured from the GAU-8. The 3 fighters and their mortar simply ceased to exist, replaced by a crater in the desert floor and a cloud of smoke. The remaining enemy fighters finally understood what they were facing. Some dropped their weapons and tried to flee, while others foolishly attempted to engage the armored aircraft with small arms fire. Their bullets sparked harmlessly off the A-10's titanium belly as Sarah pulled up and around for her next attack run. Master Chief Rodriguez watched from his position in the rocks as the enemy reinforcements were systematically destroyed. Each pass of the A-10 eliminated 2 or 3 more fighters with surgical precision. The pilot above them was displaying a level of skill and accuracy that Rodriguez had rarely seen in his 15 years of combat operations. Sarah's second attack run targeted a group of 4 fighters who had taken cover behind a small, rocky outcropping. The cover might have protected them from ground fire, but it was useless against an attack from above. Her cannon rounds punched through the rock like it was made of sand, eliminating the threat in seconds. Captain Thompson, still providing overwatch from above, called out the positions of the remaining enemy fighters. 5 Taliban were still alive and attempting to escape the area, running desperately across the open desert toward a distant wadi that might provide some cover. But Sarah wasn't going to let any of them escape to fight another day. She rolled her aircraft into position for what would be her final attack run of the engagement. The 5 remaining fighters were spread out now, making individual targeting necessary. But the A-10's cannon had more than enough ammunition remaining to complete the job. One by one, Sarah eliminated the fleeing fighters with short, precise bursts from her cannon. Each burst lasted only a second or two, but it was more than enough to neutralize the targets. The last fighter almost made it to the cover of the wadi before Sarah's final burst ended his escape attempt. In less than 8 minutes from the time she had received the first call for help, Captain Sarah Martinez had eliminated every single enemy fighter in the area. 28 Taliban fighters had been completely destroyed without a single friendly casualty. The desert floor was littered with the smoking remains of vehicles, weapons, and enemy positions. Rodriguez keyed his radio to report mission complete. The area was secure. All enemy forces had been eliminated, and his team was ready for extraction. The helicopter that had been en route could now approach safely without fear of ground fire. As Sarah climbed back to altitude, she conducted one final reconnaissance pass over the entire area. Her sensors detected no remaining heat signatures or movement that would indicate surviving enemy forces. The threat to the SEAL team had been completely eliminated. The extraction helicopter arrived 30 minutes later, finding the SEAL team safe and the area completely secured. As the team boarded the aircraft, Rodriguez looked up to see Sarah's A-10 still circling overhead, providing protective overwatch until the helicopter was safely away from the area. Later that day, back at the airbase, Sarah climbed down from her A-10 and conducted her post-flight inspection. The aircraft had performed flawlessly during the engagement, and the maintenance crew found only minor wear from the extended firing of the main cannon. The Warthog had once again proven why it was considered the finest close air support aircraft ever built. The mission debrief revealed the full scope of what had been accomplished. Intelligence analysts determined that the eliminated Taliban force had been planning a major offensive operation in the region. By destroying their leadership and heavy weapons in one engagement, Sarah had likely saved the lives of dozens of coalition forces and Afghan civilians. Master Chief Rodriguez made a point of visiting the airbase the following week to personally thank Captain Martinez for her actions. The meeting between the grizzled SEAL veteran and the young Air Force pilot was brief but emotional. Rodriguez had seen many close air support missions during his career, but none had been executed with the precision and effectiveness he had witnessed that day. Word of the engagement spread quickly through military channels. The combination of Sarah's exceptional piloting skills and the devastating effectiveness of the A-10's weapons systems had created a textbook example of how close air support should be conducted. The mission would later be studied at military academies and used as a training example for future pilots. For Sarah, the mission represented everything she had trained for as a pilot. The trust placed in her by the men on the ground, the split-second decisions required in combat, and the satisfaction of bringing American warriors home safely made all the years of training worthwhile. She had proven that, when American forces were in danger, there was no more reliable guardian angel than an A-10 pilot with the skill and determination to get the job done. The Taliban fighters who died that day had made a fatal miscalculation. They had believed that by ambushing a small SEAL team, they could achieve an easy victory against American forces. Instead, they had encountered the full fury of American military technology, operated by a pilot who would not allow harm to come to the warriors under her protection. Years later, when Sarah had risen to the rank of major and was training the next generation of A-10 pilots, she would often tell them about that mission in the Afghan desert, not to glorify combat, but to emphasize the sacred responsibility they carried as close air support pilots. Somewhere below, American ground forces were counting on them to be ready when called upon. The mission had lasted less than an hour from beginning to end, but its impact would be felt for years to come. The SEAL team returned safely to their base. The Taliban lost a significant portion of their operational capability in the region, and Captain Sarah Martinez had earned her place in the Brotherhood of Warriors, who had answered the call when fellow Americans needed help. The desert returned to its eternal silence, marked only by the scattered remains of those who had chosen to fight against American forces. The A-10 Warthog had once again proven that there was no more feared sound on the battlefield than its distinctive cannon. And no more welcome sight to American ground troops than its twin engines and straight wings appearing on the horizon when they needed help the most.